University of Nairobi. Hello?
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, I want to welcome every one of us to this meeting. This is the second webinar meeting organized by the Committee of Fiscal Studies, University of Nairobi. I am Justus Munyoki, a professor of marketing at the University of Nairobi School of Business. Now, members, as you know, that the current pandemic has caused a lot of havoc in our economy, actually touching on all sectors of our economy. And food security is one of the key things in any country that wants to be stable. If the food security is affected by anything, then the whole economy can actually collapse. We are concerned at the effect that this pandemic, COVID-19, has brought about to African countries, to Kenya in particular. And so today's theme is understanding the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on food security in Kenya and globally. We have invited several experts to talk to us, to shed light in terms of our preparedness and what we can do as a government in Kenya and in Africa as a whole to be able to address this issue, the likely impact of food insecurity that is going to arise. I want to introduce the speakers that we have on board this morning. We'll start with Professor Sheila Akoth. Shown just by your hands, Prof. Sheila. Yes, Professor Sheila is a lecturer at the University of Nairobi. She has over 2 decades of experience in fungal research with emphasis on mycotoxicology. This is about the various mycotoxins that affect our food, the various fungal diseases that affect our food, our crops in Kenya and Africa as such. She is the president of the African Society of Mycotoxicology and actually sits in several boards. Welcome, Professor Sheila. Secondly, I want to introduce Professor John Cheminingwa.
Hello.
Prof. Yes, Prof. Cheminingwa is there. Professor Cheminingwa is an agricultural scientist. He is actually specialized in agronomy, specifically in the areas of integrated crop management, and is currently the Dean, Faculty of Agriculture, University of Nairobi. Welcome, John.
Thank you.
Third speaker is Dr. David Jakinda. Dr. Jakinda, please.
Yes.
He's in the meeting. We are not able to see him, but he's in the meeting. He's a lecturer in the Department of Agricultural Economics, University of Nairobi. He is an alumnus of the Association of Commonwealth Universities, SCU, and has PhD in agricultural economics from the University of Newcastle. Welcome, Dr. David. The fourth speaker in our panel today is Mairora Omwenga. Is Mairora in the meeting, please?
Yes.
Now, Omwenga is a civil and structural engineer and is a town planner and environmental impact assessment expert. He is currently the chairman of Town and County Planners Association of Kenya. and currently teaches at the University of Nairobi in the area of transport and infrastructure. Welcome, Bwana Omwenga.
Thank you.
Our last speaker is Madam Michelle Jerry.
Hi.
Jerry is a researcher at the CFS and is a law student at the University of Nairobi. Together with these two, we have two other members that are in the plenary, and one of them is John Atim. Is John in the meeting? Okay, maybe she'll join later. She's an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. And then we have Elvis Oyare. Elvis in the meeting?
Yes, I am. Good morning, everyone.
Morning to you. Welcome. Elvis is a researcher and a law student also at the University of Nairobi. As I said, I'm just as Munyoke. I'm going to be the moderator of this meeting. Now, I want to give each one of our experts not more than 10 minutes to give their contribution in terms of what they know about this, our research topic this morning. What can we do as Africa? What are the issues that are pertaining to food security in Africa and in Kenya specifically? How can our government, rather, what can our government do in order to mitigate the effect, likely impact of this problem that is going to arise, which we are already experiencing as a result of the pandemic called COVID-19. Let me take this opportunity, therefore, to invite our first speaker to make her remarks in not more than 10 minutes, Professor Sheila, the mycotoxicologist. Welcome, Prof.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor. Good morning to all of us. I will start by first defining food security as the availability at all times of adequate, nourishing, balanced, and safe food. So it is not just the quantity of food, but it has to be adequate, it has to be nourishing, it has to be balanced and safe for consumption. So I will talk on the probable impacts of the COVID-19 crisis on food security at household level, because I know my other colleagues will talk about the food safety at country-wide perspective. So what are the probable impacts and potential mitigation response that our government can impact on us at this time? Now, the main action that is adversely affecting food security at household level at this time is restriction on movement. As much as it is good, yes, but it affects household food security. Now, the first reaction on restriction on movement necessitates to store food, reaction to store food. And this affects the low-income persons differently from the high-income persons. For the low-income persons, they will rush to accumulate mostly non-perishable staples. They don't have much choice of food because we also have income shocks. We have prices hiked, so they are not able to hoard healthy food, and also they don't have capacity to store enough. But for the high-income population, we see increased purchase of ultra-processed foods, which tend to have longer shelf lives. Now, with all these two groupings, you can imagine the scenario. If this pandemic persists, we will both end up with health issues for both groups. Then the suggested mitigation in this scenario is supply of food to the needy and the poor, low-income persons. And I can see from the media that our county government at the coast have already begun to do this. So we would encourage the other counties also to do the same. And but safety should not be forgotten as we supply food for the needy, because we know that Kenya has a history of aflatoxin poisoning. And at this time, when we have a health issue as number one, we can easily forget safety of what we give out. And this can bring another problem. And Kenya is a hotspot for aflatoxin accumulation in food. So I think the government should also work with major retailers to ensure fresh food supply chains remain open. And we can applaud our government for up to now that we still have food access, even with the curfews. So this should continue. And of course, protecting the self-employed in food systems. And my colleagues in economics will give a wider perspective of how to support them economically. Now, the second scenario that we see impacting food security is food production. Now, input prices definitely go up during such pandemics because of access of movement and also just because of profiteering. Companies wanting to make profits at the center of need. So input prices, food prices, and transaction costs will also likely to increase. And also markets for farmers will work less smoothly due to less reliable market information. So for the low-income population, we will see reduction in investment, in agricultural investment in production. For example, 2 days ago, I saw in the media a fishmonger in Kilifi complaining that she's unable to sell her fish because of the curfew. So she has to sell some the next day, and instead of selling at 250, she ends up selling at 100 per piece. So there is a loss for her. So that means that the risk of appetite for investment for the low-income population becomes low, and this reduces access to food around that scenario. Now, for the high-income population, the supply of nutritious foods is likely to be maintained, given that they have supply chains to access, but of course with irregular delivery and probably compromised quality and fluctuating prices. And also for the high-income population who have farms, we find that hiring of farm workers will be more difficult if they cannot cross border. So the movement also impacts production of agricultural produce, which eventually relates to food security in the household level. And mitigation strategies here can be for the authorities to provide preferential tax relief for domestic workers, farmers or producers. Then a third most important impact, again, especially for Kenya, is food distribution and storage. Now, for the low-income farmers, they will experience less traveling. See, because less traveling is discouraged. And 2 days ago, we saw yesterday, I think, the Nyandarua farmers were viewed in the media complaining that their food is going to wastage. So distribution is not possible, and so we have food wastage. So at one end, there's food wastage. At the other end, there is lack of food. People don't get enough food for themselves. And this also brings an issue of storage. And storage is a problem in Kenya because most of the aflatoxin poisoning that we have had in Kenya is due to poor storage. So this is a time that at no other time that we request the food safety agencies to become vigilant more than any other time in the past. And we could also encourage the government to provide spare haulage capacity, which can also provide to get food from the farms to the markets. I saw again on media our neighboring countries giving out army vehicles to transport food from the villages to the city. Then our fourth problem is food markets and retailing. So for the low income population, definitely the food safety if systems break down, safety will worsen. And the more vulnerable lower income persons, weak persons, will also lose out in the physical scramble for food. And profiteering is also likely to rise. For the high income persons, of course, they will be panic buying, and panic buying favors them. So food safety should get much high prominence at this time in our national policy, and we should also find a way to prioritize the elderly and the weak to access food and to restrict volumes at purchase sale points, and also to monitor and expose profiteering. And lastly, just 1 minute, throughout the value chain of food supply, we also have to protect health workers. Now, many companies have been told to work from home, but we know that food industry cannot work from home. They have to disseminate food. So they should work well to make sure that they are safe so that we don't have particles of the viruses left on food packages and food surfaces, so that they themselves can remain safe, but they also protect the population who are trying to access the food. So I have not exhausted everything, but I think those points can give us points that we can continue our discussions on. Thank you. So thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I hand over to you.
Is the chair there?
Yeah, where is the chair?
Sorry, he may have dropped off. Can we just move on to the next speaker, please, while we wait for him to join us?
Thank you.
George,
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Yeah, I can go ahead. Thank you very much, listeners and viewers.
Yes.
I see the chairman has come back.
Yes. Hello. Yes. Now, Karibu, George. Sorry, I was experiencing some network problem. So, George, please make your contribution in terms of this area of food security. Thank you, Sheila, for the contribution you have made.
Thank you very much, moderator. In terms of the impact of COVID-19 on food security, globally, of course, the pandemic is expected to cause a crisis in agriculture and the food sector. And according to FAO, there is actually adequate food to feed the world at the moment. The issue is availability, accessibility, and maybe the safety of it. But otherwise, there's enough food to feed the world. There is also minimum disruptions to the food supply chain, globally speaking, except for logistical purposes. particularly when it comes to food crossing the borders with no restrictions other than compliance with the food safety standards. We also expect that countries with the humanitarian crisis like wars will be most affected, and it also means that African countries that are very poor will all be very vulnerable to the effects of COVID-19. In terms of impact of COVID in Kenya, it is a fact that our value chain actors, those are the input suppliers, the farmers, the transporters, the traders, processors, and even consumers, are actually frustrated, stressed, demoralized, and averse. So basically, we expect in our country that the food supply chain has been disrupted, and we also, of course, expect that there will be reduced productivity. We have, first of all, the disruption of supply chains of fruits and vegetables because of the curfews, the lockdowns. There is also closing and relocating of markets. Traders, therefore, cannot be able to access the markets, and they may also not access the farms. For example, in Mombasa, the crop produce market at Kongowea was moved to Tononoka grounds to create more space for social distancing. The same thing has happened in Nakuru, where there's relocation from the Nakuru town market to the Afra Stadium, where the market will be. That basically makes the traders not be willing to move because there are also costs involved. So that becomes a challenge. There is also the disruption of the supply chains for grains, including from the breadbasket regions of the Rift Valley and Western Kenya. And remember that most transporters are informal, and normally they are not able to prove that they are essential service providers when they reach roadblocks. And that means that there is a shortage of grains in some areas, grains like maize, like beans, in some regions, particularly in the eastern part of the country. And associated with that is an increase in price. In addition, Kenya does not produce enough of the grains that it needs to consume. For example, beans and maize, and even sometimes maize. Beans normally in the country is imported from our neighboring countries, from Tanzania, from Uganda. Some of it even comes from Ethiopia. And because of the pandemic, the borders are not, they are open, but roadblocks. So they are logistical nightmares when it comes to the movement of food. We also expect a lot of disruption in the supply chain of livestock. Particularly, we are talking about cattle which come from the dry areas of the country, the northeastern parts of the country, the small stock and poultry also, which we get from far-flung areas to the city. And that means that we may experience reduced meat supply in the cities and towns because of the pandemic. What can we do to deal with that? Of course, what we would expect is that we should now encourage urban and peri-urban farming, fish farming, poultry farming. We need to improve the efficiency of movement of goods in terms of the roadblocks, in terms of ensuring that they allow people to continue moving so that we can have food. We expect that we shall have a lot of post-harvest losses because of that. Farmers and traders, particularly of vegetables and fruits, are likely to face huge harvest losses, post-harvest losses due to limited buyers. We have already said delays in movement and also lack of cold storage facilities because these are very perishable produce. Fruits and vegetables are actually likely to start rotting on farms, not because there is a glut or excess, but just because there's lack of facilitation of traders and other chain actors, like, for example, processors, so that they can evacuate the produce to the cities. Okay. For grains, we expect a lot of post-harvest losses in terms of insect damage, and what already Professor Koth has talked about, mycotoxin contamination, aflatoxin problems. The traders may also have food waste in terms of meat products. How can we deal with these problems of post-harvest losses? We need to support storage, transport and protective gear to move from places of production and supplies to places of deficiency. This will allow the various actors to be able to move produce. We need government to invest in storage facilities so that we can store and move the food where it is needed. We also need fruit and vegetable collection centers where sanitary conditions can be controlled within the counties. We also need to invest in value addition, like local processing of fruits, drying facilities. We can invest in cheaper solar-driven dryers so that we can have new products being developed, and therefore to take care also of the excess.
Okay.
We expect disruption of the input supply chains because most agro-dealers are informed, and also they therefore face difficulties in movement because we have restricted movement. So we need the government to support these agro-dealers because they also play a very important role. They are the ones who also advise the farmers. So that is a major challenge for input suppliers because the rains are here and the farmers need to be planting. There is also a challenge in terms of provision of extension and veterinary services because our extension and veterinary services are largely site visit type, which is not now possible because it's curtailed. What therefore needs to be done is for us to move to the online system, online platforms, so that we need to promote digital agriculture technologies for smallholder farmers to access information on various aspects, the markets, agronomic practices, animal health management practices, and so forth. So we need to have that put in place. We also have another challenge. We have the desert locusts that are within our country. And if you have watched news and read newspapers, there is not much that is being talked about the desert locusts. What we are now talking about is COVID-19, and this may actually not a problem. The desert locusts are actually out there in the fields breeding in the areas they have invaded, and in the second phase of invasion, they may be a big havoc may wreak a big havoc to our food security. So we need also government to make sure that we still focus on the problem of the desert locusts, so that when we are through this pandemic, we don't find ourselves without food.
Thank you, Prof.
Yes.
Oh, okay. You can wind up in a minute. Yeah.
Yes, I can end up in a minute. The other component, which is important, is in terms of government to invest in the provision of inputs and machinery to farmers, provide them subsidized rates. We also, of course, have challenges in terms of ability to do research, and that should also be focused on. And I think what is important for the government is to keep the borders open so that food can come from across.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Prof. George, for that contribution. Let us now invite Dr. David Yakida to tell us more about this. David, as we said, is an agricultural economist from the University of Nairobi. Karibu, Daktari. Yes, Dr. David. David, we are not able to get you.
Okay, now I hope I'm moderator.
Yes, yes, now we can hear you.
Professor Sheila, okay. So I want to add on to what my predecessors have highlighted. They've might be focusing on three important interventions, particularly making food cheap and affordable, or by increasing the money in the pockets of the consumers. So the three important intervention areas that I want to focus on, the first one is on the Tax Amendment Bill of 2020, which was just about to be discussed by the two levels of Parliament, and this was to be discussed alongside the measures that were announced by His Excellency the President. Now, in the amendment bill, there are three issues that directly affect food security, and one of them was the proposal to introduce tax on fertilizer. As we know, currently fertilizer and agrochemicals are tax exempt. Now, introduction of tax on fertilizer will increase the cost of production, and at the time when the country and the world are battling the COVID-19 challenge, that will greatly disadvantage the food security situation. Another proposal in the Amendment Bill 2020 is the suggestion to increase tax on fuels, and we know that most of the agricultural products are processed through industries that use fuel, and therefore if the liquefied petrol gas in particular, if the tax on that is increased, there's the challenge of pushing most of the vulnerable households to using unclean sources of energy like charcoal and firewood. And because the COVID-19 challenge particularly affects respiration, it's important that be reconsidered. Another proposal there is the classification of bread. There's a suggestion in that amendment bill to introduce tax on what they call non-basic bread. And here they are talking about bread that contains anything other than wheat. And we all know that when we talk about the COVID-19, there's the issue of immunity. And nutritionists tell us that to improve our immunity, we need to go the biofortification way by finding ways of improving the nutritional content of most of the food that we eat. But the tax proposal goes against that because it seeks to increase tax on value-added, particularly biofortified forms of bread. So my suggestion regarding the Amendment Bill 2020 is that the proposals on tax increase on fertilizer, LPG, and improved forms of bread be reconsidered with a view to actually eliminating any form of taxation on that. The second intervention area that I want to talk about is our strategic food reserve, as well as the role of the National Cereals and Produce Board. We know that the national government and the county governments have done a lot of good work in mobilizing resources, both locally, that's financial resources, both locally and from our development partners. And some of this is being channeled through the strategic food reserve. But the challenge is that for a long time, the main focus of the strategic food reserve, which is run by the committee at the Ministry of Finance, as well as the National Cereals and Produce Board at the Ministry of Agriculture, their main focus, if you look at their mandates, seek to or focus or concentrates more on cereals and legumes. So my suggestion here is that if the definition of food security, which will then determine how the financial resources allocated to the strategic or the food reserve and the NCPD are used, if the definition of food is broadened, particularly to include fruits and vegetables, because these are very key food components when we talk about improving the immunity, because COVID-19, like any other form of flu, has great effect on people's immunity, and we really need to reconsider how we budget for food reserves to include fruits and vegetables. And it is in this particular intervention that then we can go into sourcing the fruits and vegetables from the smallholder farmers, so that the operation of the strategic food reserve and the NCPB are not only limited to buying cereals from the large-scale farmers. I think here we can achieve a win-win situation for both the smallholder farmers as well as the consumers if we are able to broaden the use of the funds allocated to strategic food reserve and NCPB to bring on board even smallholder suppliers of fruits and vegetables. The third intervention area is particularly to address what Professor Sheila and Professor Cheminingwa talked about, the breakdown in the supply chain because of certain logistical bottlenecks. Of course, the restriction of movement is necessary as one of the measures to control further spread of this virus. But we are seeing that one of its effects is that it's limiting supply of food products. Now here, one important intervention that can really help is by mobilizing different arms of government, different departments within the counties to help in coordinating the distribution of food. For example, most of the vehicles are grounded now, except those that are carrying food. But we are not sure about the safety of those lorries that traders are using. So here I would suggest if we are able to use the National Youth Service vehicles, be they lorries and so on, if they are fumigated and then they are used at the county levels to assemble various forms of food from the smallholder farmers and put them in strategic village banks within those counties. And while that is going on, another state department that needs to be mobilized are our quality inspectors, because in each county we have the health department, the agriculture department. So the food inspectors should be part of the team assembling food from the various production points in the counties to the assembly points. And finally, Professor Chimuma talked about extension. We are in a planting season. So if the state departments can be mobilized and coordinated to ensure that farmers do not stop production, but they do it in a safe way. Thank you very much, moderator.
Thank you, David.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Now, Let me invite Mairura Omwenga to tell us more about this issue of food insecurity. As I said before, Mairura is a civil structural engineer, has a lot of experience in terms of environmental impact assessments and so on. Welcome, Mairura.
Thank you very much, Chair. Now, I think then, thank you very much for my fellow panelists for that very useful contribution. Now, I think I'm going to talk more from the side of the town planning part as a town planner, and therefore in terms of land use and control of that land use. First and foremost, let me say that as towns and cities generally globally, from a global point of view, are the major consumers of food and therefore of agricultural produce. But yet the same towns or cities produce least food at the moment, and the scenario is even worse in our local situation here. Then also it's the same towns that consume the bulk of the food that we grow, but yet you also find that the towns are the places that are the first point of polluting land that we may want to put under food production. And therefore you find that for towns and cities, then we have that dilemma that they are the main consumers of food globally, but yet in terms of production, they produce the least amount of food. And also in terms of pollution, they are the main sources of polluting agricultural land or even the produce itself when it's produced because of the activities that are undertaken in towns. So I think that's the perspective that I want to post right from the word go. Having said that, going back historically, you found then that in the olden days, because of the pollution nature, for example, industries that pollute the air, pollute the water resources, agriculture was not allowed or was restricted in urban areas because of that element of pollution, and therefore a lot of food then was left to be imported from rural areas into the towns. Now then, with the kind of scenario we have now, then the bulk of the food that we consume is coming from outside the towns, the cities, and with a situation like what we now have, there is restricted movement between the rural and urban areas. That certainly then is going to affect the supply chain as far as food is concerned with the towns. Although the restrictions for supply of food is not there, but the mere fact that you are actually restricting movement of people, that certainly also affects the flow of food to some extent. So certainly town cities are going to be affected with the supply of food compared to rural areas, because for rural areas, I mean, in the very first instance, one can assume that really from the subsistence point of view, the individual households in rural areas are able to very quickly meet their immediate food demands from the farm that they have. But as we say that, I think I want first of all to make reference to two very important provisions in our constitution, and I want to refer to Article 60 of the Constitution and also Article 66 of the Constitution. Article 60 tells that as our people, as Kenya, we must make sure that we're using our land in a manner that is sustainable to be able to meet our needs. Then Article 66, broadly speaking, also gives the state and therefore government the powers to regulate on how land is to be used for various activities. Now, speaking as a town planner, then you find in the context of a town, the bulk of the land, for example, then is put under housing, industrial development. It is put under institutional development. It's put under transport and so on. Very little land is set aside for agriculture for reasons that I've already given out. But I think it's important that that has to change now, because it is the way in which production used to be done before in industries is no longer the case. Now we are having cleaner industrial production processes, and therefore industries may not be as polluting as we had before. And therefore it's possible that now really we can practice urban agriculture, okay, in a sustainable way to be able to meet the needs of the towns. And therefore, I think it's important that we have to change that paradigm shift to make sure that we are not just always as towns looking for rural areas to supply food to our towns, but that within the towns, because our production processes in our industries have become cleaner, we can actually practice urban agriculture. And for this urban agriculture, I think I want to say that it doesn't need that you need to have a very huge land holding within your town to be able to practice that agriculture. We see efforts to at least, even for very limited amount of land that we have, we can actually be able to complement the supply of food of households within urban areas. So I think that's a very important thing to do. And for that then to also happen, it also means then that our public health regime needs to be strengthened. Because here we find a situation where we've seen this and we have read this, where you actually find that polluted water, wastewater, is actually being used to water our agricultural produce, vegetable and other crops in urban areas, in the open. Okay, it's not being hidden. Okay, and yet we simply keep quiet and continue to let that happen. So I think it's important, and this is the time really that as a people, as a government, the Public Health Act must be enforced. So it's not that it's lacking, it is the element of enforcing the legislation, that the law that exists to protect the interest of the larger public. So I think it's important that that item is emphasized. And having said that, then I think it is not just for the public health officers that we want to leave that responsibility to. I think we need to be our own soldiers, as it were, people to protect themselves. So if there are elements of pollution that are happening in our neighborhoods, in our towns, I think it's a high time as citizens we made sure that this does not happen, and therefore we protect our first and foremost before waiting for the government to come in that particular regard. Now then on the second part, so I must say that really the COVID-19 situation is really going to affect our food security, not only just in the towns but also in rural areas, because it's going to affect a lot of the supply chain systems all over, locally and also internationally. Now the second thing I want to talk about is then that towns also have been seen to be places that encroach into the rich agricultural areas. This is where you see, for example, like now, and if we take the relationship between Nairobi and Kiambu, for example, for quick illustration. When you look at the long-term plan of the city of Nairobi, the city is really supposed to be growing towards, can you call them the less agricultural potential areas, towards the eastlands, towards the Machakos direction, Maboko direction, parts of Kajiado, where the agricultural potential is less. But you see, we have prepared plans in that direction as town planners, but you see what's happening? Instead, the city is actually growing very fast into the very rich agricultural areas of Kiambu, the food basket of our city of Nairobi. And indeed, we now see serious reduction in the amount of food that is coming from Kiambu into the city. We're now importing our food all the way from Murang'a, from from Nyandarua, from Nakuru, and so on. So this element of urban sprawl, as we call it, into the rich agricultural areas, I think needs to be stopped in that particular regard. And therefore, it's important that element of urban sprawl, it does not just actually affect just Nairobi alone, but it seems to be an element that's happening throughout the country. And this is why then we find that from the town plan point of view, it's important that we make sure that whenever we have got our towns, their boundaries are clearly defined and they are enforced, such that activities that have got to do with urban development, industrial development, commercial development, housing development are confined to the defined boundaries of the town.
Thank you very much, Omwenga. I think that's very good contribution of you. I know there is a lot we can say about this, but I think you have made a very important contribution in terms of where we need to go in terms of city planning and so on, town planning and such. Let us now invite Madam Michelle Jerry, maybe to add a few points in terms of what we have just discussed.
Thank you so much, moderator. Just as I begin, just to highlight that food security involves 4 components, that is availability of food, affordability of food, accessibility of food, and safety of food. And I will confine the parameters of my discussion into these components of food security. So in regard to availability of food, as my predecessors have said, the food supply chain in Kenya has already been interrupted, and farmers and consumers are stressed because the access to markets is limited. That's mostly due to the containment measures that have been undertaken by the government, such as the curfews and the lockdowns that have interrupted the way people interact in the market and yes, access to food as well as availability of food. The second challenge that I encountered in my research is the affordability of food. This is in regard to the fact that most of the industries have been closed down because of the pandemic and how we interact within the industries, therefore leading to a loss of income. Therefore, this may lead to a strain in how people may be able to access food as well as afford food because they do not have the appropriate income to buy food. Lastly, I would like to focus on vulnerable groups, especially groups like refugee groups and people living in arid and semi-arid areas who mainly rely on international assistance so they can get food and water and such things. I therefore question whether they will still get international assistance, seeing that most of our focus is being driven towards how to combat this pandemic. Also, with regard to people living below the poverty line and children who used to rely on the school feeding program, you see because of the closure of schools, they may not be able to benefit from those programs anymore, as well as there may be some dietary restrictions to people who have specific nutrition requirements, for example, people living with HIV and AIDS and diabetes. Therefore, we have to question what effects the global pandemic may have on the access to the right amount as well as the adequate nutritious foods that these people need for their survival. Therefore, in light of these challenges, I recommend that the government should work to support the domestic food production and, as Professor Sheila earlier mentioned, by providing things like preferential tax relief, as well as encouraging new alternative methods of farming that are more sustainable. In addition to this, there was introduced a new fund known as the COVID-19 Emergency Response Fund. And yes, it is a good initiative that tries to address the issues that come with the global pandemic as they arise, but we need to have a lot of transparency and accountability in how those funds are being used, with specific regard in how they're being used to combat any issues that may arise due to food security. We're not being told how they're going to ensure that food is still secure within this period. Lastly, there have been initiatives by the county government as well as the national government to ensure that the most vulnerable groups in the society are being taken care of during this time, that in the event of a complete shutdown, they'll be able to access food. For example, in the Mombasa County, the most vulnerable groups are being identified, and their names are being taken to the chief as well as the county government to know, so that they can have a record of who to help during this time. There lacks a bit of clarity into knowing who falls into these vulnerable groups, because this is a whole new dynamic that we do not know who these vulnerable groups are, and this definition should be as inclusive as possible, because we can find that people who used to heavily rely on the agricultural sector, such as people who small trade farmers, and people who used to rely on fishing and such industries like that, they might fall into that vulnerable group because of the loss of income that has come due to the slowdown of that industry. Yes, that is all I have for today. Back to you, moderator.
Thank you very much, Michelle, for that contribution about the vulnerable groups in our society. How do we identify them and to make sure they are going to be safe? Now, at this point, I want to open the plenary session. And in this, we are going to be guided by Joachim and Elvis. I hope you are in.
Yes, we are in.
Yes, we are.
So okay. Welcome, Joachim and Elvis.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. Hello, can you hear me?
Good morning.
Morning.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Can hear
Good
you.
morning.
Can hear you.
Thank you, all the speakers.
Good morning.
Yes, thank you, all the speakers. My name is John Atim. I work with the Committee on Fiscal Studies, and I'm an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. Now, I'm very happy with all your presentations, which were actually very, very solution oriented. Everyone was giving, instead, at a time of crisis, we have to come together and put our heads together, which I really appreciate. Now, I'm just going to highlight a few things that I noticed from the discussions, and probably what was not really focused on. In my opinion, the issue of the desert locusts, which at the moment is destroying more than, according to FAO, has destroyed more than 7,000 hectares of vegetation in Kenya. Because of this, I've seen Kenya is among the countries that is supposed to benefit from the shillings 150 million from the African Development Emergency Grant, which is to stop the issue of the desert locust. And the approach is from the use, basically, or the approach they're taking is the control of the pests, of the spread of the pests, prevention, to prevent the potential next generation of swarms, conducting impact assessment, and the issue of administrative cost. Yes, much as the COVID pandemic has taken over, you have a number of measures also coming into play. But I think also governments, or the government of Kenya, should take this seriously. The issue of the desert locust. And then what also I considered, or what I've looked at, Joel Baraza.
Yes.
Kindly mute a bit. Kindly mute your. It's affecting. Thank you. Yeah. So the issue of the desert locust. Also, another thing is the issue of food storage, which I think was really pointed out by Professor Jane, and I think those are really welcome solutions. Now, a good example also of a country that is taking the issue of food security very importantly. You can see the issues that were introduced by the President, His Excellency Museveni, the President of Uganda. He has left the food industry and the agricultural sector running. Much as there is lockdown, the issues of people still selling food, the supply chain, he's left it on and running, and I think that is a very good measure, because if we are talking about perishables and issues of maybe, for example, food that gets spoiled very fast, then we have to keep the agricultural sector running and all these food supplies running. Because as at last week, I'm just making my final comment. As at last week, you have a number of people. There are a number of issues with the fish was in counties like Kwale. People are complaining of low sales and the fish going to waste and all that. So really, I'm really very impressed and happy with all the solution-oriented approach being taken by everyone involved, all the stakeholders. Thank you very much. That is all I think.
Thank you very much, John, for that contribution. I think it's an important area you have brought about, especially the area of the desert locust, which I know John mentioned that, but I think we are not hearing a lot about it. I think it was overtaken. It's being overshadowed by this thing of COVID-19. But it's important that we don't lose track of it. You have rightly put it, and the issue of food storage and so on. Elvis, maybe you want to say something also?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Good morning, everyone. My name is Elvis Oyare. I am a researcher from the Committee on Fiscal Studies. Thank you very much to the panel for all your insights. My input will be in the form of a question to the panel on something that we may not have discussed so much. So my question is, considering that the implementation of a countrywide lockdown is not completely off the table, and we can even say that it's impending, do you think that Kenya is sufficiently food secure to feed its citizens for a period of lockdown? Especially considering that countries that have implemented lockdowns, and I think successfully implemented lockdowns, countries such as France, Italy, have relied on mostly formal market systems, and as Professor Cheminingo has stated, e-commerce. Whereas in countries like Kenya, almost 90% of the population relies on informal market systems. For instance, your regular mama mboga, even the high-income earners in our country, also rely on informal market systems. So basically, what I'm asking is, do you think we should scrap lockdowns completely for food security reasons, or are there any measures we can put in place for our country, either in the short term or in the long term, to protect food security in the instance that imposing a lockdown becomes essential? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think that's some kind of a question, an open question, whether are we really food secure to manage this in case of a total lockdown? Are we going to suffer even more? And I think at this point then, I want to invite to open for question and answer session. We will take about 40 minutes just to get questions, either direct to individuals or maybe to the panelists, and any of them can answer these questions. And let us start with this first one, which has just been posed by Elvis. Are we really food secure? Can we say we are food secure? I know, John, you alluded to that at the beginning, that food is not the problem. It's maybe how to move it to the right place at the right time. Maybe we can comment on that, and we go to the details, questions and answers session.
Hello, moderator.
Yes.
Can I respond to that question?
please do. David, yes.
Yes. Yes, the question is about whether this country, Kenya, has sufficient food reserves or adequate food to sustain a lockdown, for example, 1 month, 2 months, without importation. Because now, so my answer is that yes, we do have enough food to take us probably for the next 3 to 4 months. That is looking at the reserves at the National Cereals and Produce Board and the Strategic Grain Reserve. But we also know that because the National Cereals and Produce Board and the Strategic Reserve only account for what comes from the large-scale producers, and particularly cereals, there's a lot of food out there from our smallholder farmers, which has not been documented. And it's good that as we talk now, the government has mobilized various departments to map out the food situation in different counties. And we know there are teams going around to actually find out how much food of each type we have in each corner of the country. So I don't think there's need to worry about the food situation, because even without imports, what we have within our borders should be enough to take us for the next 3 months. And because we believe in possibilities, we hope that after the 3 months, we can have a way out. So I don't think there's need for worry, probably in the next 3 months. What is within the country can sustain us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John. And David, you were saying that we don't need to worry in the next 3 months. We have enough reserves. But I know that John earlier talked about the value chain, the movement of this food from where it is to where it is needed. How is it going to be moved, especially in the case of a lockdown?
Thank you. That is where I was making a suggestion that, sorry, I can see George is talking.
Maybe he wants to support that point. Yes, George?
Yes. I think Dr. Jakila has said there is enough food for a while. But I think from my perspective, the borders should not be closed. What they should just do is ensure food safety standards are put in place properly, but ensure that food is moving, because food is not everywhere. So food has moved from one point to another. Otherwise, what will happen is that you will have in one place plenty, another place no food, and people will starve. So I think the movement has to, if there's lockdown, you can lock down everybody else, but not people who are moving food. And if you can be able to ensure that they follow the safety measures, then we'll have no problem.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
And can I add something?
Yeah.
Can I add something on that? So
yes, please.
In my presentation, I mentioned about the use of government vessels in the transportation. Of course, after they are fumigated and thoroughly inspected by agencies like KEFIS, because now, even though we are not at the total lockdown point, but the major worry is on the safety. Because, you know, some vehicles have been allowed, some traders carrying food are allowed to pass through the borders, but it's not clear whether they've been inspected. The inspection that's going on so far is on the health of the individual, but how about the food itself?
Okay.
So we also need to strengthen the quality assurance on the food that is being carried, and that's where the national agencies can play a major role. Thank you.
Thank you. Joan raised an issue of the desert locust. Of course, we are not talking a lot about it. We talked about it in December and January, but we have gone silent on it. Does it really affect our food security, the desert locust? Should we be saying more about it even as we talk about the COVID-19? Should we be getting updates? What is the government doing about it? Where is it? What impact does it have?
Thank you so much, moderator.
Yes.
If I could just respond in a minute, then the experts can go on.
Yeah.
The issue of desert locusts, first of all, is a major threat to food security, not only in Kenya, but in all the countries that these locusts have invaded. Remember, it's a cycle. Even if you've fought the grown-up, you call the mature locusts, they've still caused havoc in one way or another. So I think it's very, very important that the government keeps us in the loop regarding the fight against these desert locusts. Remember, I highlighted that Kenya is among the countries to benefit from the shillings 150 million from the African Development Bank emergency grant, to stop the spread of the desert locusts. So it's very, very important that they keep us in the loop, and also the fight against these desert locusts continues. We cannot just let it go. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe we could ask the planner also to say, it's not the planner, but we could ask Sheila. Maybe Sheila, you could also answer something on that.
Not on the desert locust, but on food safety. So somebody else can answer desert locust. Somebody else can talk about the desert locusts, not me.
The desert locusts. Anybody in there? Yes, we seem not to know a lot about these desert locusts. Yes. Hello.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I think the issue of the desert locust. Hello? The issue of the desert locust is important.
Yes,
the issue of the desert locust is certainly important, and of course the government must continue to address it. But in the circumstances in which we find ourselves in, I think because of the magnitude of the COVID-19 problem, and because it is instantly threatening the survival of our health and indeed death, I think that's why a lot of attention globally is being focused on the virus rather than on the locust. So it's just a matter of priority at the particular time, because the virus is really a terminal threat that is really affecting humanity globally. So it's really timing, and we must continue as government to monitor what's happening on the locust as we look at the COVID-19. But coming back to the question that was raised earlier about, are we prepared for the lockdown and we have enough food? I think it's a difficult question to answer at the moment, because we are not getting very clear direction and information from the authorities. At least from what we read, we hear that our natural reserves do not have enough food, okay? And then another time we are getting an opposite view that no, we have got enough. So it's really difficult to tell whether we have enough food, and therefore that we have, if we face the lockdown, we'll be able to survive. And on that same breath, for how long, whatever reserve that we have and whatever food that we have, how long it will take us, I think that has also not, the authorities have not released very clear information on the same. But saying about that, I think, if I remember, in the Agriculture Act that we repealed, I think about 7 years ago, the Agriculture Act was very clear, right from at the time of planting. As a nation, we must For scheduled crops, for example, it's maize. There is adequate statistics as to how many farmers grow maize, what acreage is under maize, and the status, and all those was clearly spelled out. I don't think we have that system today. And therefore, the availability of accurate data that is reliable is really the question, but it will also be actually really the problem.
Okay. Yeah, I think that is very important in terms of planning purposes to know, do we really have enough for the country? For how long can we survive on what we have? And if we don't have, is there a plan to bring enough stocks in a matter of time? Yes. Let me ask.
Moderator.
Yeah. Yes.
It's Elvis. I'd like to point you out to two speakers who'd want to give interventions from the chat box.
Yes.
From the chat box. David from Uganda and a representative from the Kenya Peasant Association. Thank you.
Yes.
Could they please unmute their mics? Thank you.
Yes, please. Welcome.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, I'm David Otieno. Hello, can you get me?
Yes, we get you.
Yes, we get you, David. Go on.
Thank you very much. I'm David Otieno from the Kenyan Peasants League, which is a social movement of small-scale farmers operating in Migori County, Nairobi urban farmers, and Machakos County. Well, I'm also a small-scale farmer, and I'm happy to have heard about the positive news and that most of the speakers or all are talking about solutions. But from the perspective of the small-scale farmers is that there's very minimal involvement of the small-scale farmers, even as we talk about food distribution, as we talk about the hygienic standards. Yeah, because as a movement, or we find that if you go to the rural areas and even in the informal settlements of Nairobi, you find that the small-scale farmers and the consumers are taking the issue of COVID-19 very seriously, and you find that within the communities, within the movements, there are efforts being done to ensure that the families are safe, the households are safe, even as they distribute foods among themselves. So maybe what I would propose is that there is need for involvement of the food producers, because according to FAO, you find that the small Nairobi. Hello.
Hello, David.
Hello. Sorry,
Yes, David, we can hear you. Proceed.
Yeah, so I was saying that there's need for involvement of the small-scale farmers in terms of coming up with the regulations to ensure a ease of movement of food. Because sometimes we talk about government trucks, we talk about NIS lorries, but the question is, if my mother has been sending me like 10 gorogoros of maize from Awendo to Nairobi, maybe after 2 months, to support me in Nairobi with my family, then how is that system being protected in the new regulations that are being put in place? We have had situations in Kaliani Market in Machakos where women are being whipped by the police because they have gone to buy maybe food for their families. We are having farming groups that can no longer meet, or when they want to go and borrow some seeds from, like right now there's a planting season. So maybe things that need to be considered is maybe as we make the regulation, we should not criminalize the peasants' way of life that has sustained these communities. And we also need to enhance extension services, as someone has pointed out, to ensure that these farmers can also, together with the government, develop safety standards that can be used within the communities to ensure that the normal informal systems of which actually serves many people. And you find that we also think that when the government is making recommendations on supporting agriculture, sometimes you find that most of the support goes to large-scale food producers. And you find that most of the large-scale food producers produce for export. So it is very, very much important that if there's any support, then it also goes to support the smallholder farmers so that most of them produce for subsistence or for the immediate market. Then it is now very important so that they are also involved in that kind of support. And maybe lastly, we also need to think of how the safety standards at the household level, because the government seems to be focusing much on the safety standards at the level of transportation or at the level of the markets, but so much within the household level, apart from wash your hands, apart from keep social distance, apart from be safe, but no much intervention is being done. And that's why we as the Kenya Peasant League, we have enhanced sensitization of the households, even as they share food, even as they produce their own food or share with their neighbors. They need to ensure that they take safety measures at that level. And I think we need to find a way of accrediting this, because farmers are actually part of the essential service providers. But as Cheminingwa rightly said, they might not have documents to allow the government to consider them as essential service providers unless they are registered, for example. So it is important that we find ways of also including indigenous, homegrown safety measures and efforts to fight coronavirus, even as we talk about safety of food. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much, David, for that
Excuse
contribution. Yes.
Excuse me, through the chair.
Yes,
Excuse
please.
me.
Yes, Sheila.
I don't know whether I'm
Yes,
taking you backward. This is Dr.
I agree with David. I agree with David about including small-scale farmers in the value chain. Now, one important thing that our government will have to do, because we don't know when the next pandemic will be, is understanding the value chains. Now, our value chains in most African countries is very complicated. We have the small farmer selling to a middleman, to another middleman, to another middleman, and compiling of food and so on, before it finally comes to a point of sale. So this also brings a problem with safety, because you can test at one point, but it goes through many other small steps before you finally have a collection. Even what we have at our grain reserves is a collection from a multiple full chain that nobody knows how it intertwines. And this is where we have a problem with following safety issues. So in most cases, we talk about safety with large producers, but we forget about our small producers. And my suggestion is, number one, that we can develop in our ICT applications, because ICT applications can connect farmers. And then if we can also have collection centers. So these formal collection centers can be areas where now safety checkings can be done. And also there can be a form of traceability. So if we develop our ICT competence, we have collection centers, we develop traceability, then we will be good to go and involve everybody in this produce, and everybody is able to be checked as regards safety. Thank you.
That is very important contribution, Prof. About dealing with the households, the value chain, going all the way to the lowest unit and being able to trace it, the steps that goes through, because there are safety concerns all along. So thank you very much. There was another comment. Yes.
Chair.
Yes, please.
Chair, this is Dr. Ngala, and let me pull you back a little. I was wondering, the desert locusts, are they the variety that can be edible? so that we could harvest them and keep them for future use.
Okay, what is anybody who understands whether they are yeah, that's an interesting question. I think we need to answer there. Yes.
May I comment about the desert locust, Professor Munyoki?
Yes, Buenadini.
My name is Kimenjo. Yeah, thank you very much. This issue of the desert locust keeps going and coming back. I would like to state that the desert locusts are edible, but the magnitude of the risk that we have in our hands is not that can be contained through harvesting by young men and women with the aim of preserving the desert locust for food. We are dealing with an outbreak that has to be contained as per now by use of chemicals. When situations like this come up, really, there is not much you can do apart from spraying and killing those insects. Mr. Chairman, sir, I would like also to mention that desert locusts are not the only biotic risks to food production. We also have other pests and diseases. In view of the restricted movement of experts, the surveillance system that detects occurrence of those pests and diseases has been disrupted. So we are facing many other risks, potential risks to food production from the other pests and diseases that can cross our borders unnoticed, especially at this time when there's restricted movement and surveillance of the experts.
Okay.
Hello.
Prof,
thank you.
Kimenju, contributing. Oh yes, thank you very much, Prof. I think that is very important contribution that there are all these other. Yes. Yes, that is Madam Prof. Onyango.
Yes, Prof. Yes.
Yes. Now you can make your comment.
This is Jane. Jane, can I speak?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I would like to refer us back to, I saw Professor Cheminingwa mentioned it, and a bit of, Professor Mairura also mentioned that. For me, one of the concerns that we should have, as we're talking about food security in totality during this situation, is yes, people are eating, but what are they eating? All right, so there's because of the limited access, and somebody alluded to our dependency on informal system, the mama mbogas, to access of fruits and veggies, and with this restricted movement, people are actually not eating fruits and veggies, and this is protective food that we must eat to boost our immunity, especially for, to protect us from disease and all. So the question I have is, how are we going to enhance access to fruits and veggies? You have probably seen on TV, for example, our vegetable farms in Naivasha that grow for export. They're stuck with produce there because their target is the export market. Now, how do we get those veggies into the system? Because rather than let those veggies and waste because they can't be exported because of now the limitation of air transport, we need these veggies. People need to be sensitized on the importance of eating the protective food. But after we sensitize them, how do we ensure that people have access to this protective food, whether in the fresh or processed form? Because this is critical. Otherwise, we'll be dealing with the other, health issues during this lockdown, because people are just.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello, Chair.
Hi. Yes, yes. Oh, thank you, Jane, for that. But Sarah, I can see she wants to make a contribution.
Yes. Having worked in a hospital for a long time, as a clinical dietitian, it has actually come now to catch up with us. There is a big delink between food security experts seem not to link it up to the nutrition aspect, meaning for many years we've always thought if there is hunger or there is a problem, that if we just take the maize, the beans, and the cereal to Turkana, for instance, that one you've taken care of hunger. Then we forget this woman does not have even the fuel. Her body is so sick, she cannot even process. She can't even process these beans. So my perspective comes from the lessons we've learned from the countries that have dealt with this, like China. If you look at them, in the United States, they are now telling us that the health workers, all of them, they've been put on 1,000 milligrams of, let's say, vitamin C, because hello? Because if you find them in the intensive care unit taking care of these COVID patients, you can't possibly expect. One small orange has got 70 milligrams of vitamin C. And now 1,000 milligrams that is able to give a protective element to these workers and our patients, it requires around how many oranges a day? 10. And obviously you can see we are not able to get this because of the lockdown. So what I need to say is that every time we are planning, please put the clinical nutritionists and dietetics people on board so that where we reach with our potatoes and our maize, let's now take care of the small element of the micros and advice. Because otherwise, we are going to have people feeding on maize and falling down to perish because they are lacking the elements, like in the traces. That is my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for that important contribution, really.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I wanted to add something.
Yes, John?
Hello?
Yes,
I
we are
wanted to
getting
add
you.
something on that. Yes, I wanted to add something on that type of innovation. In that question about ensuring that we have that food supply, and we have an issue in the country whereby we always have poisoned food being supplied or unhealthy food being supplied. Others taking that advantage for people who are maybe they have no idea on how and where this food has been brought from. But now I wanted to say something about this food security, because our main problem is how do we ensure that we have continuous production of this food? How do we ensure that we have continuous proper way and method?
Oh, this. Let me see. Go back.
Oh. Yes, perhaps we are losing you. No.
Mr. Chairman, sir.
Hello.
Yes, can you hear me, Mr. Chairman?
Hello? Chairman?
I can hear you, Professor
Hello?
Cheminingwa.
Okay. The chairman is off. Or can the chairman hear us?
Professor Cheminingwa Dean, can you
the
take
chairman has a problem.
over and you allow us to make comments? Professor Cheminingwa.
This is Professor Waris. I'll just take over quickly while we wait for him to join us. I've seen a very interesting question in the chat box from Mushai asking about wildlife farming domestication and it being a possible source of animal protein. Do we have any thoughts of how the industry will be negatively affected by the outbreak? We can mitigate the pandemic's impact on this sector. Who would like to take the question? George, would you like to take the question on wildlife?
I didn't get the question.
There's a question,
please.
There's a question on the wildlife farming domestication, which is being promoted, might have an effect because coronavirus started from a bat. Do we have any thoughts of how it's going to affect the wildlife food industry? George, please go ahead.
Yes, I think the current studies that have been done, there is no evidence that there is movement of the virus from animals to human. The current pandemic, COVID-19, is known to be basically at the moment human to human transmission. But what we can say is that when it comes to dealing with the meat, of course, we have to take precautionary measures to ensure that meat is properly cooked so that in case there is any contamination, we get rid of it. And basically, it will not be encouraged to start eating bush meat because there is still a possibility since the science of the transmission is still going on. So I would think that the best way to ensure that when you are in contact with those pets, you make sure that you also disinfect, follow the sanitation guidelines that have been provided. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There is also a very interesting comment from Shaheen Chandbai talking about the fact that security should be strengthened and that we need to start changing the practice in Kenya on what is edible or not edible. Sheila, I ask you to answer. We wait for the chair to come back on.
Thank you, Tia. What our government should remember is the definition of food security. So when one is food secure, then they have enough, they have nutritious, it is accessible, and it is also safe. Now, there's a wide array of foodstuffs, both vegetables and cereals, but we only speak of food safety, like one of our contributors said, when we supply cereals. And we also forget to check the safety of that cereal. So all this array of nutrition that a human being requires to be healthy should be included in the definition of being food secure. And we can have programs to encourage, to sensitize the public on what to eat, including the low income and the high income persons. Because like I said from the beginning, at this time of the pandemic, you find the well-to-do accumulating the ultra-processed foods more in their fridges. I'm sure if I come to many of your fridges right now, those who are listening now, I will get ultra-processed food safe packed there. And the low-income ones, they have the cereals, of course, minus the vegetables. And I'm also happy that the University of Nairobi has a project on post-harvest losses, drying of vegetables and fruits packed. And this can be another thing that can be upscaled so that we are able to dry our vegetables, sukuma wiki and osuga and etc. We dry them so that now during the other seasons of the pandemics like this or starvation, then we can access all arrays of food. And Jane is a good resource in this, drying fruits, vegetables, and such kind of wet produce, so that we don't only rely on the wet market. We will not be complaining now that where is the mama mboga, and where are the wet markets if we had access and storage of such foods? Thank you.
Thank you.
Allow me
So
to ask a question.
Please hold
Madam
on.
Atia.
Please hold. Thank you. We're
Hello?
just going to go through the
Yes.
presenters and see if they have any comments. Michelle, would you like to comment on any of the questions that have popped up?
Sorry, I got out of the meeting, but I'm back now.
That's okay. I'll hand over right
Yes,
away.
yes.
Michelle, go ahead.
Now we
and
are
then
back,
we go
yes.
right?
Okay, thank you. Okay, so
Hello.
All right. Go ahead, Michelle, and then I hand over back to the convener.
I would like to just comment on something that I think Mr. David Jakinda mentioned, and something that the government should actually take necessary steps to ensure that it is seen through, and this is to ensure safety guidelines through the whole full supply chain process, through the use of all the army vehicles and the NYS employees, and yes, that I think that is a very good recommendation, and that is something that the government should focus on. As well as I think that so as to help the most vulnerable groups in society, the government should ensure that the social protection programs that are already entrenched should be strengthened, so that we can ensure that the food security crisis does not exceed and become worse. Yes, that is all I have.
Thank you. Back to you, moderator. Is he back or has he again? Oh dear. All right. Okay. So if we
Madam Atia.
if we can, yes, is the moderator there? Like I continue?
Madam Atia, can I contribute?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. My question is focused on town planning. I'm sure we have Mr. Mairura with us. When you look at the role of Mama Boga, it cannot be adulated. Yet Mama Boga has been pushed to the roadside. There is no ground that is set aside for Mama Boga in planning, the way we plan for schools, the way we plan for shops and social halls. We hardly remember to fix a site for Mama Boga. So this is where the congestion is. The social distancing cannot be observed. And this is where there are no sanitary facilities. So the virus is being spread in the open air markets where Mama Boga has been pushed to. The second contribution is to Dr. Jakida. Dr. Jakida, thank you very much for talking about the profile of the strategic food reserve. But you seem to have forgotten about the livestock products that are extremely important in our country. And also the issue of investment in science, technology, and innovation. In view of the non-weather related emergencies like the one that we have now, the government should be focusing a little more on science, technology, and innovations. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof, for that observation. Yes, I'm back to the meeting. Sorry,
Chair, can I?
Yes.
No problem. Back to you.
Chair, can I make a brief contribution?
Yeah. Yes, may comment, David.
Chair. Thank you very much, Mine is just to add on to the question on the possibility of wildlife transmitting this virus to human. And because I know there is an ongoing research by our colleagues from the Department of Veterinary Services, the Ministry of Livestock, together with the Kenya Wildlife Service. So my suggestion is that in the next session, they could probably be invited to share with us if they have any results so far, because they're trying to look at the possibility of that transmission happening between the wild birds in Kakamega Forest and the chicken domesticated, as well as the wildlife migratory corridor in Kajiado and the game parks there. So it would be good to have them represented in the next session, so that we get to know if their experiments, what their experiments are saying. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, David, for bringing that one up about what is going on. And I think that is going to be able to help us to know the relationship between this virus and the wildlife. Is it true they can transmit disease to humans? Now, I want to go specifically to just about 3 questions. Very specifically, I want to know whether there are any private-public partnerships that are going on with the government of Kenya and maybe in Africa to be able to address this issue of the pandemic versus food security. Is there anything that the government can do in terms of a public-private sector financing structure?
Hello, moderator.
Yes.
I think this one. I think
yes, we are listening.
Have at the moment are efforts to bring on board as many stakeholders as possible, corporate institutions bringing some kind of donation, but we do not have like a framework which we can talk of as a private-public partnership on financing, because this is in response to the emergency.
Okay.
So many more stakeholders are being brought on board. So maybe in the next week or few weeks, we'll see how this is shaping up, particularly for our country.
Oh.
Thank you.
Would we then, yes, thank you very much, David, for that contribution. Let me ask you this, ask just this other second question. What proposals would you want to make to African governments to be able to effectively finance this issue of food security? Do you have any specific recommendation to the government of Kenya or maybe another government in Africa for effective financing?
I think my suggestion is that we put this the African Development Bank.
Yeah.
Because matters of financing in the continent are coordinated at that level. So if our national governments can work with the African Development Bank to come up with the best public-private partnership for financing, that would work.
Maybe just to add on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, George.
Yeah.
Yes, just to add on that apart from government, we would need also
yes,
the
David, George.
UN bodies. I'm saying we should also, other than just government, we need to have the UN bodies like FAO also come in and other donors so that they come in and support this initiative.
George, can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yes, Prof, we can.
Yes.
Go on.
It looks like the chairman is the one who is, the moderator is the one who is off.
Actually, yes.
We lost
John. We
John.
can hear you very well.
Yes. So I was saying we just need also, other than the government, we need the donors and other partners to come in and contribute to this, because it is something that is not just Kenya, it cuts across.
Yes, and I will also add on the World Bank. The World Bank has recently shown an interest in supporting food safety, and I've even started a center for food safety in Nigeria for the whole of the region, of African region. So since they're interested in food safety, which is also part of food security, then I think the government can reach out to them to support this endeavor.
I think as we what interventions to education on food safety is very, very important, because actually I've been very surprised at the way Kenyans are taking the information on how to keep safe. And although most of them have learned, the practice is not there. It is business as usual. They don't know even how to handle the food once it comes to their house. I can see people are not working with the masks. It's just business as usual. So I think no matter how safe the food is, we still have to educate Kenyans, the most of us, on food safety. It's important. So a component of education must be left there.
Yes, true.
I'm still
true.
Also, I want to talk about the locusts. If the locusts can be harvested, let us turn our misfortune into some advantage. So the locust came and we didn't invite it and we didn't time it. But can't we harvest the locust and turn it into food? So I still feel that it is worth investing in the locusts and taking them, distributing them to areas where they eat. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Members, I think we have made a lot of progress in terms of our discussion. A lot of issues have come up. Let me just take a minute each to allow each one of our presenters just 1 minute to say one final word, starting with Professor Sheila. Just 1 minute each. Let me wind up. Prof. Sheila?
Her mic
Can't
is
hear
off.
you.
Yes,
Her
I'll
mic
put
is
it
off.
on. Yeah, I would like
yes.
to summarize. I would like to summarize that the country must get prepared for such pandemics, because no one knows when and where the next pandemic will be and how severe it will be. But we all agree that there may be another pandemic coming even after this. So we must be prepared not only in terms of our medical front, but also in terms of our food security. So the government should be on the lookout on the points that we have said that can improve our food security and also distribution.
Okay. Thank you very much, Prof. John, you want to say something?
Professor's mic is off.
The mic is off. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah. Now, what I can say is that the government needs to focus on boosting urban agriculture, especially in terms of fruits and vegetables, so that we can be able to have adequate amounts of them when we have a crisis like this, including also poultry farming. Even for the ones who don't have a lot of space, they can do vertical farming. The other thing that we should take advantage now is to go into E mode of delivery of extension services, so that we can be able to reach farmers wherever they are. Finally, whatever it is, the government needs to have a critical critical balance, ensure between the pandemic and food security, to ensure that the community gets access to food, and ensure there's food safety nets for the vulnerable groups, and ensure that they support research, invest in post-harvest storage facilities, and value addition, so that we can be able to deal with this problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof, for the contribution. And David?
Thank you. My last point is that, yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Yes, my last point is that the government and all stakeholders should invest in coordinating the distribution, first by decentralizing the food assembly, so that we do not have food going into waste in one part of the country, whereas in other parts there is complete shortage. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. Mairora? Yes, Mairora, your mic is off.
Okay, thank you, Chair. First and foremost, let me say that I think first and foremost, the responsibility of our health, of our nutrition rests with us as our people, even before we come to government. So I think as our people, because we make decisions through political decisions we make, where the people put governments in place and get them out, I think everything starts with us. There is need for greater public education on really the need to appreciate that basic things like health, basic things like food needs to get priority in terms of our planning, in terms of our budget allocation, in terms of technical expertise training and so on. It is so sad that at a time like this, you find the medics that are required to be employed, they are jobless, okay? Agriculture officers, I think government stopped employing agriculture officers many years back, and yet we are a food and agriculture-based economy. So I think it's important that our people will get to make sure that priority items are tackled first and foremost before everything else. And then lastly, on the same line, we must make sure that we also change our habits. How come that we're just eating along the street? We're just stopping by. People are selling mandazi and the tea are on the street, dusty, raining and whatever, and we're simply buying and eating. I think we must stop and at least respect ourselves and make sure that wherever we're eating, it's from a place that is really acceptable, and not simply to say that you just eat at any convenient time wherever you want to eat. I think that must stop. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Finally, Michelle, you want to hand something?
Yes. Just to summarize, I'd like to say that the government should focus on meeting the immediate needs, the immediate food needs of the population, as well as adopting measures that are flexible enough to enough to suit any demands that come with the evolution of the virus. And also, when these regulations and measures are being taken up by the government, they should also include all the sector players within food security, because we've had people from the clinical dietitian as well as small-scale farmers who, in as much as it seems that the problem is being contained, they also know that there are more layers to this problem. So if we want the measures to be as comprehensive and foolproof as possible, we should include and involve everybody. The measures should be as inclusive as possible so that we can be able to address any food security issues that may arise during this pandemic. Yes.
Thank you very much, members and the panelists, for your expertise and for the contributions. I want to now say that we have come to the end of our meeting today. It was very fruitful. We thank everybody who has participated. We thank specifically our panelists for the useful